Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2024 library tour. In this episode of history, I have some of my collection organized how I ultimately want my history collection to look. So this episode sees most of my Ancient Egypt and Ancient Near East collection. You obviously saw two books, or three actually, earlier in the tour, and there are two coming up next week. So this shelf has my Ancient Egypt, Ancient Near East, and some Ancient Greek history. So let's get going. And for a change, I've read most of these books. Okay, so first up is Brotherhood of Kings, How International Relations Shaped the Ancient Near East by Amanda H. Padani. So far, this is my favorite history that I've read this year. It's an exploration of the relationships between the various kings in the ancient Near East. How some of the stronger ones formed father-son relationships to weaker kings, and how the greater kings formed a faux sibling relationship with each other. It's really fascinating. I really enjoyed this book. It's not as fun as Weaver, Scribes, and Kings, but it is close. Moving on to Egypt. This is The Story of Egypt, the Civilization That Shaped the World by Joanne Fletcher. So this is probably my favorite history of ancient Egypt. My only critique is it's a little too in the weeds regarding the measurements of various buildings and monuments. I have a number of biographies of ancient Egyptian monarchs, starting with The Woman Who Would Be King, Hatshepsut's Rise to Power in Ancient Egypt by Kara Cooney. So this is a biography of Hatshepsut, one of a few of the small number of women who became kings of Egypt. I'm not too fond of this biography. I don't particularly get on with Kara Cooney's writing. I've read both of her books. I think there's only two. There might be a third by now. But of the two that I've read, I have not gotten on with either one of them. I did like The Story of Tutankhamun, An Intimate Life of the Boy Who Became King by Gary J. Shaw. This is a nice, short biography of Tutankhamun that I think I reviewed for Open Letters. I also reviewed Ramsey the Great, Egypt's King of Kings by Toby Wilkinson. This is also fairly good. I'm not fond of at all of this next book, Egypt's Golden Temple, When Akhenaten and Nefertiti Were Gods on Earth by John Darnell and Colleen Darnell. So this is a joint biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and the book is weird. So part of the book is a straight biography of the two, but each chapter opens with a fictionalization, and interspersed throughout the narrative are the Darnells' adventures as archaeologists. And I didn't bring it up in my review, but now that I think about it, this does sound an awful lot like a PBS special or a BBC special, where the Darnells are basically, it's like, on one hand, sort of the story of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. On the other hand, with dramatic reinterpretations, and then also featuring the Darnells running around Egypt, possibly with some cameos from Zahi Hawass. So not too fond of this book. Another tip to nuts history of ancient Egypt is The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson. I'm not as fond of this book, largely because of Wilkinson's treatment of Hatshepsut. Returning to Tutankhamun. This is the Complete Tutankhamun by Nicholas Rees. So this is a large study of his tomb and of the grave goods within it. And it is lavishly illustrated. Perhaps a little overly speculative, but interesting, particularly if you look at the pictures. Next is yet another book by Toby Wilkinson, Tutankhamun's Trumpet, Ancient Egypt and 100 Objects from the Boy King's Tomb. Even though, keep in mind, he was in his late teens by the point he died, although he was a boy for most of his reign. Anyway, so this is an interesting look at the history of ancient Egypt. And I like the idea of it. The problem is that it gets too repetitive. A number of the objects can go into different categories, and so it ends up being repetitive. To end ancient Egypt, I also have by Toby Wilkinson, Lives of the Ancient Egyptians. So this is a dictionary of biographies that I really didn't particularly care for. Moving on to the Hittites, I have 2 books on them, as well as one that's generally about Anatolia. So first up, and both of the Hittite books are by Trevor Bryce. So first up is The Kingdom of the Hittites, which is an okay history of the Hittites. I'm really hoping eventually there is a big history of the Hittites in the vein of Big Wonderful Thing or Weaver, Scribes, and Kings, even though the Hittites do appear quite frequently in Weaver, Scribes, and Kings, but I would like history dedicated just to the Hittites. I also have Life and Society in the Hittite World. I know there's a 3rd book in this sort of trilogy about the Hittite military, but I don't have it. This is In the Land of a Thousand Gods, A History of Asia Minor and the Ancient World by Christian Merrick in collaboration with Peter Fry and translated by Stephen Rendell. So this is a massive, dense history of Anatolia from prehistory, from the time humans first settled the area to the Romans. And I found it impenetrable, except for the parts where I'm interested in it, which is largely the Hittites. This is a history of the ancient Near East by Mark van de Meeroop. So this is a history of the ancient Near East that largely excludes Egypt and I think the Hittites, but it focuses mostly on Mesopotamia and the Levant. So like Syria, that area, I think, is the remit of this book. It's been a while since I've read it, but I do quite like it. I have on Assyria, The Rise and Fall of the World's First Empire by Eckhart Fromm. So this is fairly good until the end. It starts to falter at the end. Another book that ends up faltering at the end is Persian Stage of the Great Kings by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. So this is a history of the Achaemenid Persian Empire that it's quite good up until it basically becomes a soap opera, and the only sources used are Greek sources. I found this next book, partially on Persia, equally as annoying, and that is Rome and Persia, the 700-Year Rivalry by Adrian Goldsworthy. So this is a history of the often contentious relationships between the Romans and the Parthians and the Sasanian Persian Empire. And largely the sources are limited to Roman sources, and there isn't much of anything really from the Parthians or the Sasanians. So this is a very Rome-centric book where it really should be both Romans and Persians. Anyway, so I guess I probably ought to move this to Rome when I get around to rearranging these. Moving on, well, before I get to the Greeks, I also have Empire of the Black Sea, The Rise and Fall of the Mithridatic World by Duane W. Roller. So this is a history of the Kingdom of Pontus with the various kings Mithridates. And it's okay. It's a little dense, but it's okay. So this is The Greeks, A Global History by Roderick Beaton, who also wrote Greece Biography of a Modern Nation, which will be the first book I get to when I do the wall shelf up here. So this is a history of the Greeks from their earliest beginnings to the present. And it's good. It does falter a bit at places, but it's good. This is Thebes, The Forgotten City of Ancient Greece by Paul Cartledge. So this is a history of the Greek city-state Thebes. The chapters about the earliest Thebes and Thebes before the Peloponnesian War are quite good. Once it gets to the Peloponnesian War, it's basically a rehash of the Peloponnesian War with not any focus on Thebes' role in that war. And it sort of cycles down from there. Although, yeah, it does. Anyway, speaking of the Peloponnesian War, I also have the Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan. So this is just a history of the Peloponnesian War for a student audience, which is largely how I first encountered it. So when I was an undergraduate, I took an intro to basically being in college class that focused on war. And the first section was on the Peloponnesian War and the Iliad. And so we read snippets of this book, and I eventually joined the History Book Club and picked up my own copy and didn't get on with it when I tried to read it that first time. And I don't know if I ever tried to check it out from the library when I got rid of my copy. But I ended up wanting to have my own copy and ended up not getting on with it the next time I ended up reading it, which was last year for BookTube at War. The next two books are on Macedonia, which will be how we begin the next shelf. So this is The Making of a King, Antigonus Gonatas of Macedon and the Greeks by Robin Waterfield. So this is a study of how Antigonus Gonatas became king of Macedon and his relations with the Greeks. And I also have, which is fairly good. And also have The Last Kings of Macedonia and the Triumph of Rome by Ian Worthington, which I did not get on with at all. I think I tried to read it sometime last year. I might have tried to read it earlier this year. I don't quite remember, but I do remember bailing on it. I got tired of it. So, BookTube, that concludes another shelf. I'll be back tomorrow to work on this shelf. So until then, thank you, BookTube. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.